Well, hi everyone. Ni Sambula Vinaka, Mbulasia, Talofa, Yakwe, morning. Respectful greetings to everyone joining our workshop today, particularly to our youths and young adults from around the Pacific and around the world. On behalf of the co-hosting organizations and the leaders that you'll be hearing from today in this workshop, I welcome you all to this virtual space. I honor the lands of the Pawtucket Indians and the Wampanoag people of the Masa Aduchuset, who are the indigenous stewards of this land where I'm calling from today, now referred to as East Boston in Massachusetts in the United States. And I invite you to take a minute to also acknowledge the traditional stewards of the lands and the watersheds you're joining from today. So my name is Salote Songo. I am from the provinces of the Kondrove and Lau in Fiji, and I work for the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, which is an international human rights organization that works in partnership with grassroots groups around the world to dismantle systems of oppression and advance human rights. I'm so honored to be moderating this workshop and to join a few of UUSC's partners from the Pacific whose work advances climate justice. And I'm so excited and can't wait for you all to hear from them. So the title of this workshop is Climate Forced Displacement, the Self-Determination of Pacific Island Communities and the Role of Youths and Elders. Just in case you're wondering if you're in the right workshop, that's the title of our workshop. And if you're not in the right room, please stay because we, would really love an audience to be as active and engaging as possible. But before we get started, we'd like to invite you to take part in the poll survey. So in a Q&A rather. So I've included a question in the chat. In one word, please describe what you understand about self-determination. Just one word. And speakers, you can all go to the chat and add your answers too. I invite every one of you, and no answer is a wrong answer, and we're just trying to get a feel of what people's understanding are. Awesome. I see freedom from Fenton, liberation, independence, data ownership and analysis, ownership. Awesome. Please keep it coming. So what is self-determination? Because we're a human rights organization, we're an international human rights organization, I'm going to sort of provide a framing for that terminology within the human rights framework. So self-determination is a term that is used in international human rights law and advocacy. It is a principle that grounds human rights law and respect for human rights, most commonly used to denote political autonomy of an individual and the state's obligation to respect that principle in a democratic society through its laws and policies. Self-determination is also a human right. It's included in two key human rights covenants, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, as well as the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action, all of which affirms one's right to freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. It's also included in the UN DRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, in its preambular language, as well as specifically in Articles 3 and 4 of the Declaration, which affirms the rights of Indigenous peoples to self-determination. So I just shared a lot of legal jargon, but simply put, the right to self-determination is recognized in international human rights law and its norms, and specifically in the Declaration for Indigenous peoples. And as you've heard, it relates mostly to people's right to political autonomy, to pursue social, economic, and cultural development. But we here in this room are organizers, we're activists, and we know too well the limits of international human rights law and the limits of legal frameworks and its principles in protecting our rights and protecting our homes. So why are we talking about the right to self-determination in the context of climate forced displacement? And what does it look like on the ground? In our work, we see the right of self-determination as a central piece in ensuring that people who are most affected by this risk are the ones informing the solutions to their issues. By advocating for the right to self-determination in addressing climate force displacement, we mean that, number one, governments need to engage and center the rights of people they're trying to help or create policies around. It means respecting their wishes to remain or stay put. It means respecting their wishes about where to move, when, and how. It means acknowledging the history of these people, their identity and self-autonomy as a group of people. It means fundamentally shaping government responses to the issue from a top-down, state-led decision to a bottom-up, human rights-based, community-led approach. But what does this really mean, and what does it look like in the Pacific? And that is the question that our leaders will be speaking to today. What does self-determination mean and look like on the ground, or what should it look like? So our workshop has two main parts. Our main speakers, you'll see their beautiful faces on the screen. They'll be providing their remarks on two key questions. The first one is to introduce themselves and their work on climate force displacement in the Pacific. And secondly, what or how do you define self-determination in your work? Or what is the context of self-determination in Fiji, in the Marshall Islands, in Tuvalu, and Papua New Guinea? So I'd like to start with Mark Steggy. Mark completed studies as a non-resident affiliate at the Columbia University Sabin Center for Climate Change Law. Since returning home to the Marshall Islands in 2014, Mark has led research on atoll habitability thresholds at the Marshall Islands Conservation Society and Jojicum. His research approach is to develop and pilot participatory frameworks for ecosystem services monitoring to assess an atoll community's exposure to various climate risks as these increase exponentially in the coming decades, and strengthen an atoll community's capacity to self-determine how much flood risk is too much, what amount of groundwater and rainwater is adequate, and what constitutes potable water. Mark, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Salate. And Yahweh Aulip. I'm very pleased to be here, and I'll try to, give my colleagues on the panel as much time by just, rushing through my own slides. And so apologies if I kind of feel a little rushed today. I want to acknowledge real quick that our country is in mourning over the passing of our long-standing chairperson for the Council of Uruj here in the Marshall Islands, the equivalent of the head position of the House of Lords in the United Kingdom. So his passing this past week has really been on our minds, and I just want to acknowledge that. Also, thank you to the Women's Entrepreneur Network, or Jubranai, for letting us use their facility today here at the Jubranai office. I'm very happy to acknowledge them and the good work that they do, empowering many different parts of our society as well. So I will begin now with this slide here. I hope this is going to come across. Can everyone see this one? Let's see. Well, I'm hoping that my notes page doesn't come through, but instead the presentation page. Can you please let me know if you see the notes page or the presentation page?
Yeah, Mark, we can still see both.
Both?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, let's see, how do I... How about that? Is that better?
Yes.
Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I am, as Salote was mentioning, working with Marshlands Conservation Society and Joe Chikum. Yahweh Kati, well done today. I'm happy to be working with Joe Chikum on one of the projects that the Universalist Unitarian Services Committee is funding in the Marshalls, and on another project that they are also funding at the Marshlands Conservation Society. So it's hard to discuss anything related to migration in the Marshall Islands without the very real experience that has already been held here in the Marshalls about forced displacement, or due to the nuclear testing that occurred in the 1950s. Here is a map that I think was created by the testing people, and is juxtaposed by this this next image. So I kind of want to just highlight again the juxtaposition between the map and the photo of forced displacement, and this photo where two gentlemen who are my elders from Mololap Atoll are helping me identify islands that would be ideal to receive adaptation resources, and potentially to move to those sites in consolidating our populations. So more of a choice-driven approach to this very difficult situation that we're facing. So this idea of choosing, I saw in the comments before the presentation today, a lot of references to choice and choosing and having a choice in the matter. I'm really happy to see that. So here in the Marshall Islands with other countries in Micronesia, we've identified this thing called the Micronesia Challenge, which is in terms of addressing sea level rise risks and using resources for nature-based solutions through that platform called the Micronesia Challenge to conserve land 30% of our resources by 2050. So here is a young gentleman who I've worked with, Wally. He's actually a councilman for Medjich. Similar to myself, I'm a councilman for Mololap. So on his community in Medjich, we partnered together to have him use his knowledge of a previous flooding event that occurred, so that he can identify some conservation sites to receive resources from the Micronesia Challenge. So that was really good, and it showed agency and the utilization of modern tools and his knowledge of his environment to identify appropriate location and allocation of resources. So this idea of choosing indicators also is pretty big. It's not just what you do, but how you do it, I think is often I've heard people say. So this idea of flooding frequency is a very common thing around the world. It's a well-studied way to address flood risks. So it's, frequency and magnitude are often the way that people discuss this way of managing flood risk. So not everyone will have the same answer. And in fact, if you use, for example, the International Infrastructure Management Manual's definition of acceptable flood risk before maybe, say, a sewage line is affected by flooding. So this would be, as you see here, some examples of how those value systems and maintenance of infrastructure, key infrastructure for some of our urban cities, that's how flood risk is decided on in terms of how frequently it needs to occur before certain decisions need to be made. So the same principle can be applied here in the Marshalls with our flood risk, and I think it should be. It's currently being driven primarily by external experts. The idea of developing flood hazard science or hazard risk science is still very much a external uh, externally practiced and held form of expertise, and and I think this is, it's great. We definitely need it. And in fact, people like the author of this report that's been well cited as referring to a timeline for tipping points in our islands. This particular map you see here is from Kwajalein Atoll. So Kurt Storlazzi and I are now working within the UUSC project to try to train me and in some of these flood modeling techniques. This was an early flood model that I created when I was at Columbia, as Salote was mentioning earlier. So my home, right here, just making things more personalized so that people are able to, not just look at the science, but look at the stories within these future climate, I guess, the future climate reality that we're all going to be facing here in the Marshalls. Having the ability to participate in the modeling of the floods and anticipate, not just participate, but anticipate the actions that are going to be needed and by when. So just defining, again, these flood risk management measures and participating not only in like the use of the science, but the creation of the science. So I partnered with a very good friend in Arkansas, where many Marshallese are located. Her name is Donna Davis. So she came up with some of these displacement estimates that I thought everyone would just find very useful given the topic. So I just wanted to share that. And I've been working as well with some of the teams at the University of Hawaii in doing 199 household survey where we were able to work with people on Mololap and Medjich, where Wally and I are based, but also on Majuro, where over half of the population in the Marshall Islands is living, including myself and Kathy. So some of the work that was done here is worthy of mention, and the fact that we were able to participate in the research is really important. So kudos to the people at UH for that. So what are we doing now with the UUSC in the Marshall Islands right now? So UUSC is funding two projects, as I mentioned before. One is looking at the flood risk management techniques and trying to develop those skills amongst our local practitioners. These gentlemen on the left are part of the Marshall Islands Marine Resources Authority, as well as the Lands and Survey Division at the Ministry of Works, Utilities, and Infrastructure. So we all are working together collaboratively within a group called the Coastal Management Advisory Council, and this was all done as part of the Micronesia Challenge. So it's all very, very institutionalized in terms of its platform and setup under the Micronesia Challenge, and funding through the UUSC is being channeled through that as well. We're also working in Laura Village. Here on the right is Nikki Komanta. Nikki is testing water salinity levels in 240 groundwater wells in his village. So he's gone through the process of mapping all these, and it's really amazing. Here's a quote from on the right from Moriana Phillip, who's the general manager at the EPA. There is a very clear and present need to enhance environmental data collection services by a number of stakeholders, and also a desire to engage communities in a meaningful way. Nikki is helping us prove that we can get dependable data from a well-trained community member who is equipped with a 4G connection and a smartphone with applications which allow direct uploading of data collected into a centralized dashboard. This all really changes things. The ability to use technology and Nikki's on-the-ground knowledge of this community and combining those two things, it's really powerful, and it changes things. I think things are changing, and it's quite impressive what Nikki is able to do over there. So on the left is just some quick notes on how modeling offers an opportunity for community participating Marshallese flood modelers, but there's also a lot there. So the second one is what we also mentioned with in Medjay with Wally, using his knowledge of a previous flooding event. And then, of course, the first one is something that we're really excited about, using our knowledge of wave patterns and currents to help identify the oceanic trends. And I'll point to the behind me some of the traditional navigational stick charts in the Marshalls that could be very helpful in kind of understanding those ocean dynamics. So I'm going to skip this, but maybe I'll just quickly say, yeah, I'll skip this and go back to just pointing out that the RMI has a very high youth unemployment problem at 56%. And I'm really happy that there's going to be a participant today speaking a little bit about that. And I look forward to her participation as well from the Marshall Islands. So thank you, everyone.
Mark, thank you so much for sharing how you are working to both practice self-determination, but also empower Marshallese to use their self-determination in understanding their own risks and deciding for themselves what's best for them. I think that, and Mark is being humble, but his work is not only groundbreaking for the Pacific, it's groundbreaking for every single community in the world, and UUSC is so very honored to be supporting this work that they're doing in the Marshall Islands. So our second speaker is Makereta Wangavonovono. Makereta is a law and development practitioner. She has worked as an independent consultant with international, regional, and locally based CSOs with focus on climate law and justice areas. She is currently working in partnership with the Fiji-based Social Empowerment Education Program, or SIP, and the Boston-based Unitarian Universalist Service Committee on a climate forced displacement and relocation project with vulnerable communities in Fiji. Over to you, Ma.
Okay, I'm trying to open my screen. Don't know what's happening here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Video, how do I get my video on?
If you just look at the buttons down the bottom, there should be a little video logo with a red line through it. Just
all
click on
right. Nothing? Oh, hang on.
And then you can choose your video source, and you should be able to have it up and running.
Okay, video line. Right, thank you. Hang on. So sorry about this. I had.
Do you want me to share? Do you want me to share your slides?
Yeah. I think Charlotte has got my slide. Anyway, I had some notes on the screen, but anyway, let's see. Okay, here we go. Thank you. Oh, have I gone out?
No,
Nope.
we can still see you and hear you.
Okay.
And your slide as well.
Yeah, I just can't see anything.
We can see you and your slides
Okay.
as well. Yeah.
You mean my notes?
No, just the slide.
Okay, I don't see anything at all. I don't know what I've done. I clicked on something to pull out my notes and it's anyway, I'll start and I'll fiddle around with it later. So Mbulavinaka, Namaste, Yuhao, Maloelele, and Talofalava. Talofa Atu Konamari. Warm greeting to those who I haven't acknowledged in their own language, and to others who are tuning into this session. I wish to thank the organizers USC for facilitating this session. I think most of the meetings I've been to often don't spotlight our communities in a real way, as opposed to being a token when climate events are organized. Yet they're the population sector that's most affected in this climate crisis. So in line with the theme, because I often feel that we often leave out those who have been, most affected, I've organized also for 3 reps. I think I've only seen 2 so far, who we've worked with to participate in the response session. One is our elder from Narikoso Kandavu, which has been partially relocated, and 2 youth reps. I think I've seen one somewhere from Tunuloa, the Kondrove, that's in Vanolevu, and the other from Nandronga in Vitilevu. I'm not sure whether he's in. Fingers crossed, the connectivity will remain friendly, user-friendly for our 2 reps from Kandavu, which is one of the Eastern Maritime Islands, and Tunuloa, which is in the sort of Natewa Bay side of Vanolevu. So our community project, Climate Talk, we currently work in partnership with the civil-based CSO, Social Empowerment and Education Program. It is possible that they may be involved with Bread for the World in one of, a private relocation, but there's just talks going on at the moment. And we also work in partnership with the UUSC, who is our host for this morning, with 8 vulnerable communities from Natewa, the Kondrove, Kandavu in the Eastern Maritime Islands, Koro in Lomaiviti. And all these communities have been forcefully displaced. Some of them have been relocated, others are facing relocation. So just a bit of background, because Fiji is in a kind of separate situation from the other smaller Pacific Island states. We are in the front line of this climate crisis, and we're experiencing some of the worst climate impacts. This is despite having a minimum carbon footprint in the world. I think it's only less than 0.6%. So our vulnerable coastal communities are the ones who are often most compromised, and they are the ones also least equipped to deal with this crisis and face worst impacts such as sea level rise and disasters which are frequently caused by extreme weather events such as tropical cyclones, coastal floodings. Our cyclones have been very severe and in the range of grades 4 and 5 in the last 5 years. And their frequency have wreaked havoc in some of our communities and whom we will also work with. They have often been accompanied by heavy rainfall, which in itself have created other disasters and very severe flooding. So we are finding now that the impacts of these disasters are now viewed as being of more threat to our communities than the slow onset climate stresses like rising sea levels and temperatures. So, it took a jolt for me to think of that. And I think that was first raised by one of the leaders from Kiribati. So over the years, the climate impacts we experience have had wider consequences, and they've led to like submergence of beaches and coastal land, pollution of our freshwater sources, and salination of our coastal lands. And these impacts have affected the livelihood of those residents or living in those areas. Water problem is an issue, and coastal vegetation has been depleted. Our marine resources, like food, have also been affected. And displacement is now a real thing for most of our settlements. So it's in this context that I want to talk about the relocation of communities, that is, and that I want to highlight the concept of self-determination in Fiji's context. So for Fiji, the term, if you ask Fiji, they will say, well, we have self-determination because we are independent, been independent for more than 50 years. But so that's the context that people tend to think of when you mention the word. So as independent colonies, when in the days when we were independent colonies. So for now, we tend to think it more in the context of climate change. We think more of those indigenous population who live in our ancestral land or in their ancestral land and whose welfare and interest may be at risk. But bear in mind that Fiji is a multicultural society, and this presents a different scenario. And we're not just talking about indigenous population, and the scenario we talked about is different compared to Fijian of Indian descent. So our population is about 900,000. In the last census of 2017 was 884,000, and almost we were almost reaching 900,000 now. So in the most recent estimate household and income expenditure survey that was conducted in 2019, now this is receiving a lot of controversy in the country because previously we had not disaggregated our data by ethnicity. So there was a recent release, and in that it confirms what everyone has been, or commentators, social commentators have been talking about, that indigenous Fijians comprise 62% of our population, and Fijians of Indian descent, 34%. So we need to be reflecting on the ethnicity or the different ethnic base. So Fiji's multicultural society comprised of the indigenous population, who mostly live in, for those who are living in rural areas, they tend to live in coastal villages and communities, and they comprise the most vulnerable locations, experiencing the worst of the climate crisis. Now, the indigenous population that we also call Itoke, and I'm an Itoke, we also own 90% of the land in Fiji. And therefore, we have very close affinity to our ancestral lands. It's a factor that's very close to our hearts. But while other ethnic groups and communities are not as severely affected by the climate crisis, that's not to say that there's nothing of concern or nothing that is of concern for them. It's rather that the severity and magnitude of experiences encountered are very different. So looking back, way back in 2012, it was proposed that a community integrated assessment be done. And this was actually done in the lead up to COP23 in 2016, where 5 provinces were assessed in terms of their vulnerability. So following those assessments, the Fiji government announced that 830 communities were vulnerable to climate-related impacts and urgently required relocation. Subsequently, the minister later announced in Parliament that 60 of those communities had agreed and required urgent relocation. The minister in charge has now prioritized that 48 of those communities needed to be relocated. So for Fiji, the concept of self-determination lies in ensuring that in decisions involving climate forced displacement, every sector in our indigenous community, from the village up, should be involved in the process of decision-making. This also means that women, youths, minorities, the disabled, that is those who live in those affected areas, should be consulted in the laws, regulation, and guidelines that are being made on their behalf and implemented. Sadly, this is not happening in the, in the manner it should take place, but we know that things are never perfect, and we would like to improve on this. So if you're looking for tools that that can be given for advocacy, as Charlotte mentioned earlier, there is UNDRIP, or the UN Declaration for Indigenous People, that creates a framework to assess Fijian laws and policies. And I think very, very strong in that the framework is the need for prior and informed consent. And it sets out in detail about what should be done, and consent should be obtained in a manner that is transparent, such as people signing up to whatever decision is being made on their behalf. Fiji is also a party to the ILO Convention 169 on Indigenous rights, and we are also signatories or parties to major human rights convention, which enshrine state obligations in our constitution and in our domestic law. But we're not party to the Convention on the Civil and Political Rights, and not quite sure about the cultural, the one that's where SCAP is the facility, is the one that the facilitator. So insofar as our national laws and guidelines that we work with at the ground level, I think we can say that because there had been an assessment done, because some form of agreement had been established, these consent, people are aware that of their need and have actually signed up to being relocated, or in some cases, partially relocated. However, recently Fiji's published its relocation and displacement guidelines for climate vulnerable communities. And I think the operating procedures have been drafted. And in the project funded by the UUSC, this has allowed us to work with the representatives of village and communities involving youth reps from the 8 displaced villages to create awareness on the laws and guidelines for displaced communities. And this also involves, disasters and to obtain feedbacks that we can discuss and forward to the government agencies and their partners. Interestingly, I think, just as an aside, I note that the term forced displacement has not been welcomed by some of the development agencies, and I think that has a lot to do with liability that raises. And most interestingly, there is a draft, the third draft of a climate change bill is out, and we hope that this bill will be comprehensively discussed outside of Suva. It will be unwise to rush the passage of this bill through Parliament before proper consultations are undertaken. There's a lot in there, both technically and which need to be explained for people. So in the project, we convened, and I found that to have been a very useful and a method of getting leaders and members of the vulnerable communities to sit together. And this was a first ever for community members to sit together, discuss, and exchange lessons learned on what has been happening in their communities. There was a lot of interest in the communities that had been relocated. That was Wunisausavi and Narikoso, that they are 2 communities that have been partially relocated. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to hear from one of the elders from Narikoso on what's happened there. Kandavu is also having its own set of problems with the pandemic, and it's the first of the eastern provinces where COVID has reached through unauthorized traveling. So we've had to suspend our work there so that we can just work from safer boundaries. So for ease of discussion, all our sessions were in the vernacular. That was quite a steep challenge for us, took a lot of time. And discussions started on community and individual losses. Now that's a huge topic we found. It's something that we didn't quite complete, and it's something that we'd also like to engage with, and that involves both tangible and intangible losses, and touches on another big topic, traditional knowledge, that have sustained our vulnerable communities and helped them to be more resilient in adapting to their changing environment. Now, Fiji has also recently published planned relocation guidelines, which I mentioned earlier. Now, it's been the first of its kind, and that was launched at the 2018, I think, COP. And not much is happening there, but we hope that we can work on that also, together with the displacement guidelines. Now, those are huge documents, and even more importantly, in the procedures arising from there. So those are going to be the key documents that we work with to ensure that our communities are fully, or at least are appraised with what's in stock for them. So my concluding remarks: self-determination in the context of climate displacement in Fiji is broadly based, and that ensures that affected population and the communities are engaged in decisions about their fate. So this is only just beginning to occur, and rather than have more token acknowledgement, we try to utilize our reps, because they are the traditional knowledge holders. They know what is happening on the ground. They teach us a lot more than we can read, I find. And so decisions like where they will move or relocate, how they move, the finances involved, housing standards, livelihood decision, and so forth. These are information and decisions that they need to be fully appraised with. In some cases, for financial efficacy only, some of the communities have relocated because of their precarious location. And I hope that Kelepi from Narikoso will be able to elaborate on this during response time. So for us, self-determination is about consulting affected or at-risk communities, seeking their responses and feedbacks, and making sure that this is conveyed to those who need to take the information and what is happening on the ground, or from the community level. And on that, I would say that often we are told that going into the communities, government is doing that. Why do you need to go there? But I think when you work from a community-based, decisions and processes are always very, very different from what our government agencies do and how they work. Thank you, Solote.
Nakvalebuma, so much knowledge and wisdom. I think your work clearly shows, the importance of grounding any work on climate issues in community and in grassroots leadership and wisdom and knowledge. The importance of using our legal frameworks to pressure the government to do what they're supposed to be doing, but also being very mindful of how self-determination at the very local level works, ensuring that language accessibility, ensuring that you're focusing and honing in on matters that the communities are identifying as the most priority, and ensuring that they are at the decision-making table and that they're aware of the different policies and the different political discussions that are happening without them. But I also want to, I also appreciate the fact that you brought in the importance of data, and disaggregated data, and making sure that we really understand who is impacted and how, so that we can be more strategic and targeted in our work to doing consultation and doing investigations on the ground. So thank you so much, Ma, for that work and for sharing that today. So our next speaker is Maina Talia from Tuvalu. And in encouraging him to share his bio to me, he told me to just simply describe him as from Tuvalu and as a climate change activist. So Maina, I give you the floor.
Thank you so very much, Charlotte, for organizing this event, especially to our fellow panelists who went before me. Really shed a lot of light regarding the topic at hand. Yes, before I jump into my, sorry, I didn't prepare any PowerPoint presentations, but I have a few points to power in this discussion. Before I jump into my, in my attempt to answer the proposed question, I just want to put a few things into perspective when we talk about climate displacement in Tuvalu, or climate forced displacement, induced displacement. It's the fact that there are two things that when we start thinking about displacement. First is the cross-border internationally, and secondly is the internal displacement, which is something that we are currently facing at the moment. After Cyclone Pam in 2015, quite a lot of people of Tuvalu who used to live along the shores have been forced to relocate further inland. So when we ask the question, how further inland they can move, Tuvalu is just a strip of land with very limited land, and also the ability to mobilize or move around in the country is very limited. So the biggest challenge that we are facing is the fact that how further the people can move inland. So those are the few challenges that we are facing. We are not just simply talking about crossing borders. We are also facing the issue of moving further inland, and knowing for a fact that people have limited land, and therefore it's a major challenge for them. And also when you uproot someone from a place where he or she lived for more than 50 or 60 years, it's going to be a challenge for the people. It psychologically impacted his way of life and his ability to adapt to a new land. So those are the few challenges that we are facing at the moment. But in my attempt to answer the question of what or how do you define self-determination in your work, or what is the context of self-determination in Tuvalu, I will start off with the Article 3 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which states indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination. This guarantees the right to freely determine their political condition and the right to freely pursue their form of economic, social, and cultural development. To contextualize the Article 3 of the UN DRIP, self-determination in the context of Tuvalu in relation to climate change or climate-induced migration, I would say that self-determination is the liberty given to our own indigenous communities to choose what is best and what is ought to be done for their community. With all due respect to the people of Fiji, let me take Fiji and Tuvalu case, for example. In 2014, Kiribati bought land in Fiji and later the Prime Minister of Fiji offered land to the Tuvaluans. The Prime Minister of Tuvalu at that time did not accept the offer. There are two elements that are clearly came out of why the Prime Minister of Tuvalu did not accept the offer. Firstly, it's to do with the principle of free prior informed consent, or which they call the FIPIC, which is the manifestation and pathway promoting self-determination. FIPIC, or the free prior informed consent, means that indigenous peoples must be informed about any undertakings that will impact their economic, their social, and cultural rights. The community or the people of Fiji, the Itaugie, the custodians of the land, were not even consulted on this political offer. They were not given the free prior informed consent. So, and this is one of the elements that our Prime Minister of that time did not accept the offer. You know, if we tend to accept the offer to go to Fiji or relocate to Fiji, for example, those who want to leave Tuvalu and resettle in Fiji, the biggest question that comes to mind is, are we accepted by the indigenous people of the land? Have they been given the opportunity to give some sort of consent? Or are we just go there as part of the migration scheme or labor scheme, or what kind of offer is this? So the Prime Minister of that time was very careful of what the intention behind this offer by the Prime Minister of Fiji. But basically it was, we are seeking the consent of the people of Fiji, the people of the land, the Itaugie, the custodians of the land. So that's one thing to think about self-determination, where the people of Fiji given the opportunity to decide whether they accept the people of Tuvalu to come in or no. And that is totally a different case when we talk about your island, in relation to what I'm trying to say, in relation to self-determination. And secondly, in 2018, with the support of UUSC in Tuvalu, during my tenure, tenure with Tango, UUSC supported our climate-induced migration workshop. And during that time, we invited Arnaud de Tong, the former president of Kiribati, to come in. We all know that he was the one who popularized the concept or the term migration with dignity. Although we tend to not to see, to see migration or anything to do with displacement or forced displacement, there is no dignity in it. But in fact, when we start talking about planned relocation, there should be a dignity in it, by the receiving end of the people. So we invited Arnaud de Tong to come to Tuvalu to be part of this discussion. We also have colleagues from Australia to come in, and also from Piango, from the Pacific Conference of Churches in Fiji. We want to have a diverse view from the international or regional communities, and also to our people to reflect on the ideas, on the principle of migration, self-determination, and so forth. So we had that very interesting discussion in 2018, and which nowadays we have that outcome document, which we entitle Toku Whenua, Toku Tofi, My Island, My Birthright. So that document is available on Tango website and also with Salop. So during the workshop, leaders of all communities or Tuvalu communities on Funafuti, our youth, our people with disabilities, women and elders, were all part of the discussion. The whole idea is to give them the freedom to speak their mind and voice their opinions without any fear. And also to show their aspiration and hope on what actions must be taken to ensure life continuity on Tuvalu. For them, migration shall be the last resort for Tuvalu. But the biggest challenge, that, as I said at the very outset, is the fact that internal displacement is a real challenge for us. So, although there is no consultation between the government of Tuvalu and all the community of Tuvalu in terms of having this so-called stand on migration is a definite no, but it's a matter of choice. This is just a political statement, but there is no consultation made between the government of Tuvalu and all the communities in the outer islands. So basically, we need to have that sort of understanding, like how the government can continue to advocate that migration is a definite no. But when we wake up in the next morning, half of the population is gone, washed by a storm surge or a big wave. Who shall we blame? Shall we blame the government for advocating for migration is a definite no? Or shall we blame our own communities? So the whole idea of having these discussions with our elders and our people is to give them the liberty to decide. It's up to them. So the document has been translated now, and with our hope that we'll submit it to the ministry concerned to have it as a working document, not just for NGOs, CSOs, and our communities, but something that we can complement the work of the government that are doing at the present time. I think those are the few things that I just want to highlight, but I would love to engage more in discussion manner. Atalanoa, if our colleagues are watching that and they want to ask any question. And also, Bikini and Richard from Tuvalu, they can add or challenge what I have said. Thank you, Salote.
Nakwale Bumaina. That was very thought-provoking, and you touch on a very important point about, how decision-making needs to involve communities that are affected and that need to relocate if they choose to do so, but also for receiving communities or communities in the destination countries, particularly when it comes to cross-border migration. So thank you for that, and also for lifting up the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the principles and the right to free, prior, informed consent, and the right to self-determination, which Makirata has also touched on, and is the very basis of the right to self-determination, particularly for Indigenous people. So thank you so much for that. I also see a number of questions coming in and responses going back and forth. So thank you for being so engaged. We have another speaker from Papua New Guinea, Ursula Rokova, but she's having some difficulties joining right now. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move us along to sort of the second part of this workshop. Now we're going to hear from the youths and elders from the different countries, from Fiji, from the Marshall Islands, from Tuvalu, and if our colleague from Papua New Guinea joins, we'll definitely hear from her as well. Name on our Google Doc. Mike, can you hear me? Do I just ask them to join by clicking on the share screen and audio?
please repeat that question? I just lost connection for a moment.
No worries. We are moving on to our second part of the workshop. Oh, actually, I'm gonna invite Bike Nimbeu Painu to share his reflections from Tuvalu. There are a few questions that I've asked for the youths who've been listening from the different countries. First of all, or from the youths and the elders, to introduce yourselves. How do you think youths and elders should be engaged in this work to address the issue of climate force displacement in decision making at the national, local, national, and international level? And what do you need to do this? Or what do you need from others? So I invite Bike Nimbeu, sir. The mic is yours. If you can unmute yourself and speak.
Thank you very much, Salote. I'm sure, and of course, Talofa to Maina, and Bulavinaka to Ma. It's been quite some time. We haven't met, but as I was emailing you, you're looking younger and younger and younger. You have a secret here. All right, so Talofa to all of the youth listening, and of course, to distinguished participants. The three questions I have is what do we need to do to engage in this issue of climate forced displacement? And what do we need? How do we go about to do this? What do you need from others? Well, let me start off, Salote, by saying these climate change issues are all human induced, and we, Tuvalu, have nothing to do with them. And even if we do, they're very, very insignificant. So for the youth, especially from atoll nations, the onus rests on those responsible. And of course, we know from day one, the Annex 1 countries, the industrialized countries that went on to the Kyoto Protocol, now the Paris Agreement, they are the first to depict highest degree of responsible citizens of the world. They must be responsible leaders. What do we do in order to address this CFD? Well, for Tuvalu, I'm very happy to say our government at this point in time had announced they are very much in supportive of climate change induced migration, even already looking at options to ensure the state of Tuvalu, the sovereign state of Tuvalu, will be established within another states like Monaco in France, the Vatican in Italy, and of course there are models like the FSM, Marshall Islands, and Palau under the United States of America. So our government is already committed to do that. For the youth, yes, I think what we in Tuvalu would continue to do, like I used to champion climate change from day one, since the Rio, and even before that, is just to continue participating strongly in all these global forums relating to climate change, and the COP26 is coming up, and just to continue partake and engage with those supporters or leaders that are very much for, in order for them to recognize that we have the right to continue to live in Tuvalu, and we will never, of course, we are prepared for going if we are forced to go, but we prefer to continue living in our country. What do we really have the powers, youth? Of course, as a group we can, but what leverage do we have in order for us, and especially small island nations like us, to lobby and for those rich countries or responsible countries to pay attention and ensure that we are, and we will not ever leave our beloved nation. If the Netherlands, most of it is 200 feet below sea level, why can't we be like them? we can create and build those dikes the way Netherlands is doing. So it's these countries. And of course, since day one, we have been partaking very much in these global debates. Even up to now, there may have been some views that the present governments may not be that eager to, but they are now. We will depict a very strong delegation at the COP26 in Glasgow. So like our own commitment to keeping Tuvalu protected from all these climate change setbacks, we've done adaptation and mitigation very much. But then again, in a very piecemeal approach, we need the many, many acreage of our land, and Pulaka Pit in particular. This Pulaka is giant swamp taro, Tavia in Fiji, Suva, Nosori. That is our staple food. But here our ancestors dug the pits right down to the groundwater. Now much of that is left uncultivated. Why? Seawater intrusion. There is technology now that we are now doing, but again, piecemeal, building concrete pits using concrete, bricks. But then the irrigation system, there is technology. We need billions. We have enough of this piecemeal support of tens of millions. We need $500 million and above. There is money there. The commitment in all these global climate change funds available, make the application procedures less rigid, make them easy and friendly for countries like us to be able to tap on those. And of course, as I was saying earlier, our government now has already made it public to support. And we have Kiowa in Fiji, for instance, that Maina was referring to Fiji. Kiowa is about 10 times or 20 times Tuvalu into Kiowa. And therefore, the 8 island communities of Tuvalu can be settled in Kiowa. Leased by the government of Tuvalu, of course, but this all depends again on Fiji government. So there is option for us in that perspective. But again, our sovereignty, we like to take our sovereignty with us as we leave Tuvalu, if we are, and continue to live our way, be proud of being a Tuvalu in our own way as Tuvaluans, in the many heritages that we can depict when we leave our shores finally. So with those remarks, what else can Tuvalu do? The youth of Tuvalu and the world, well, if you do seriously see the irresponsibility depicted by all these countries all the years back in their own way of trying to develop themselves and become affluent societies, well, this is the mistake. And we are the first one to suffer. So what we can do now is just continue to play our part in the global debate, in any negotiations. And as I was referring to, those project applications, rules and procedures to the climate and global funds for climate change, they are just chasing us away. They need to be amended and become friendly. Thank you, Salote. And thank you too. Good to see you all. And Ma, again, Talia, Manuia. Thank you.
Thank you, Binagwalebu, Bikinimbeu, for sharing that. I think you touched on, probably one of the most important aspects is that we did not cause this. Tuvalu did not cause the issues that that your communities are facing, that your country is facing. So that is sort of the foundation of the injustice that we're all fighting against. And you had some words of caution for Tuvalu youths, and I hope Tuvalu youths and youths from the Pacific, as you're listening to our elder from Tuvalu, to take that at heart. And also reminding us, the right to self-determination, as I mentioned during my framing, also involves and includes the right to stay. But that also requires resources. So it's what we need to get self-determination practiced and realized, resources and resourcing the right to stay and remain in your homelands in the face of climate impacts is not cheap. It's very expensive, particularly for small developing states or large ocean states from the region. It requires infrastructure, a lot of it. It requires social services and, really, really important innovations to help us withstand the forces of climate change and increased intensities of natural disasters. And that also means that global financial resources such as the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund that exist at the multilateral level need, as our elder from Tuvalu has mentioned, need to be made more friendly and accessible for countries from the Pacific. So I think those are good. Those are always important advocacy messages for those that are going to COP26 or to any COP, and particularly for our youths as you try and develop a pathway, a career for your future, to remember that there are needs that have popped up recently. Those needs will continue to grow in the coming years. These are your futures for you to be able to build the skills, the negotiating skills, the power, as Bikinimbe was mentioning, to leverage at the international level for your people and the Pacific as a whole. So thank you so much, Bikinimbe, for that. We're supposed to have other youths. Atina, if you're listening, are you able to join the panel? Or Kelepi Saukitonga from Narikoso? Kevaka ni warong muni na click on the or top right hand corner to request to share your audio and video. Or Atina, if you're listening, if you can click on the right hand corner of your screen, top right hand corner, to share your audio and your screen so that we can hear from you.
Hello, can you all see me now?
Hi, Atina. Thanks so much for joining. And I pass the floor to you.
And thank you, Salote, for having me. Thank you to the panelists for their very informative and comprehensive interventions. I have learned a lot more about climate force displacement, and I hope my following intervention will be able to add some value to the discourse. So I'm going to quickly introduce myself. My name is Atina Schutz, and I will be sharing my thoughts about how youth can be more involved in this from the perspective of a young person from the Marshall Islands. So I'm a third-year law student at the University of the South Pacific, and I'm based in the MLS campus in the beautiful Republic of Vanuatu. I'm also part of the student activist group called Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change, where we are campaigning to use international legal mechanisms to bring about ambitious climate action globally. I'm also a member of the Secretariat of the Pacific Islands Climate Action Network, which is a civil society network of non-governmental organizations around the Pacific dedicated to fighting for climate justice and a sustainable future. So my involvement in the fight for climate justice and sustainability stemmed from the moment I realized how harmful the impacts of climate change would be to my Micronesian home islands, and the possibility of climate force displacement becoming an immediate threat. So since I'm framing my talk based on the prompts provided, I will cover the first ground. So how should youths be engaged in the work to address the issue of climate force displacement in decision-making at the local, national, and international levels? So I want to begin by emphasizing the importance of youth participation in decision-making. The youth can always be counted on to provide added value to any discussion and should be seen as a long-term investment towards building the capacity of future thinkers, leaders, and actors in climate force displacement issues. Youth could also be instrumental in climate force displacement preparations and responses, as well as the plannings in these. Furthermore, youth comprise a significant portion of the population. So it is only fair and democratic that they also be included in the decision-making involved in the creation of policies, plans, and the responses to climate force displacement. I also want to really highlight that it is actually our future that is being decided in these spaces. So in short, youth need to be meaningfully involved in all areas of the work addressing climate force displacement and its drivers at all levels, national, regional, and international. This brings me to the second thing to cover is what do we youth need in order to do this? Building on what I had said earlier, we need a direct involvement and a platform to complement this. And this platform can be in the space for young people to be trained and mentored under climate experts taking action on climate force displacements. This would also create a support network for burgeoning climate experts who want to take action on the issue. These young people could always band together to pick each other's brains to develop plans, policies, proposals, etc. Another really cool thing to include would be a mentorship program where a young person interested in the area could be taken under the wing of an experienced expert in this field. The mentee can shadow their mentor and learn from them, and this creates an intergenerational learning experience. Another is the creation of a support network of citizen scientists or citizen actors from various locations. Each citizen scientist or actor can inform others of current developments in their location and embark on knowledge exchanges. All of these examples that I provided are ways that the space or platform for youth to occupy. This can be used as an example of a space or platform for the youth to occupy as they equip themselves with the necessary skills. Another thing that's really important to note, of course, is that some of these initiatives may need some capital. And I just want to give a personal example. As a person who is also part of a network of other young people with one common goal, the conversations and learning exchanges I've had with them are some of the most inspiring, and they're very crucial to how I move forward in my work. So I'm now going to move on to how the elders, I guess, can help us accomplish all of this. So after having said all of this, we rely on the leaders, policymakers, and established experts and individuals to help make this realistic. One way to meaningfully involve youth is to include them in national, local, and international consultations on climate force displacement policies and preparation plans. And I say meaningfully, and you meaningfully do this by taking our voices and concerns seriously and to treat us as equals in these forums. Too often, us young people are always relegated to the sides, or we feel we cannot speak up in meetings because of the presence of older and more experienced people, as is also common and even taught and enforced in our various specific cultures. But as I have mentioned earlier, it is our future that is being discussed in these meetings. So it is only fair that we get an equal, if not more highlighted say. Another way that the elders can help is to take on the role as mentors and to guide us young people in these. Going back to what I had said earlier about national and regional spaces, one way to help us cement these spaces is to probably institutionalize them so that they are sustained and that they are not just some one-off initiative. And it would also help to be able to provide some capital for these initiatives. So just to conclude, I want to take us all back to Mark's presentation where he was showing some of the work that one of the youth was doing. And from what I remember, this young person is involved in studying water salinity, which is a key factor in climate displacement. And by doing this and by training this young man is also gaining relevant skills and is building his capacity as a future water specialist potentially. Because of the lack of quantitative data in this area, it's really important that the work that this young man is doing, it would greatly contribute to much needed data. And this puts the young man in a position where he can create a greater impact in his community. I also want to finish off by saying that going back to the same example, it's this young man is just one person. And so imagine how much more impact can be made if you use all of the interested youth in this area. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Atina. We're so very honored to be with you today and for you to share those very clear and articulate asks and also guidance to our elders about how they can best support you and in the various different ways that you've identified. Mentorship, citizen scientists, being meaningfully involved in all the discussions from the local, national, and regional and international level. And I hope that all the elders on this call will appreciate that and work towards that. We have actually 1 minute, and we have so many things more to discuss, but I'd like to just give the floor to Maina. He has a very important response to one of the questions in the chat. And while Maina is speaking, I'm going to include another question in the chat that I'll ask all of you to respond to before we close. Go ahead, Maina.
Well, thank you so much. I think Leo Inga raised a very pertinent question regarding the citizenship. If we tend to migrate to Fiji, take it for example, and then whoever born in Fiji, will that person entitled to have a Tuvalu passport or a Fijian passport? I mean, at the reality of things, you will become a citizen of the host country. But when you ask the question regarding EEZ, exclusive economic zone, in the absence of any international law that address a country, for example, Tuvalu, will be totally submerged. And then, in fact, when we are all in Fiji, for example, the biggest question is who will own our EEZ? Who will own that, that marine resources? There is no international law that address that particular question, but that's something that we need to look into it further. A point made by the Right Honourable Bikini Bill by New, it's very important as well, because the person who initiated this idea of, she called it nation exidu, a person by the name Maxine Brekat. She's a lawyer by profession, and she's teaching in the University of Hawaii. I asked the question directly to her: is this something realistic in terms of if Tuvalu is totally submerged and we end up in Fiji, can we still maintain our sovereignty? This is her response. It's just an idea. It's an abstract idea. But because this whole idea of nation exidu derives from the UN Charter in 1945 something, and this whole idea of nation exidu will diverge the understanding that of how the UN trusteeship was initiated at the very beginning. So this idea of Tuvalu going into Australia or New Zealand and maintain sovereignty is an abstract idea. It's not a realistic idea at the present time. It's still a long discussion, and I think 20 or 50 years we will come to a conclusion. Who in the world will accept Tuvalu to come in and maintain their own government, their own? It's difficult. That's why going back to option A, maintaining our sovereignty in Tuvalu, should be what we should focus at the moment. We should not divert from that. I mean, these are just my personal view, because it will be very, very difficult, as I pointed out. Will the Itaukie accept us as their brothers and sisters from Tuvalu? Look at the case of Gioa. They are all from the people they're all from Tuvalu, from my community, from Waidubu, but they are not having any sort of a Tuvaluan passport. Well, they can do that now in terms of dual citizenship, but basically their primary citizenship is Fijian. They are Fijians, literally. So those are just a few things that I wish to flag them out at this end of our discussion. But thank you for those thought-provoking questions and discussion. Thank you so much.
Nagvaleu, Maina. So that actually concludes our workshop today. Nakawagalevu for everyone for coming in and joining us. I see 35 people stayed with us for a whole an hour and a half. So we're so very grateful. Thank you so much. Shout out to tech support, Meek, for supporting us. We couldn't get some speakers from the different islands, but you know, this was an expectation just because of the telecommunication infrastructure and connectivity issues, but we so very much appreciate all of you for joining and for staying with us. So please look out for the recording that'll be available on Hopin, and we thank you again. Very much appreciate your time. Naka.
Naka, thank you.